The ounce pistol is a folding pocket gun, which is tiny when folded, and then it unfolds into this really odd-looking little package. It has a 10-round magazine up on top. It is semi-automatic. It is long-stroke recoil-operated and chambered in 22 long rifles. So this is a 22, which is not blowback, which in and of itself is super fascinating. But this gun is like another level of interesting. The mechanics in here, ton of stuff happening at once, and in today's video I'm going to try to go over some of it and show you some of these mechanisms in action and just the incredible ingenuity of this gun. Here we have 3 different cameras rolling. There's a little blue button on the back here, which you press to release the grip. From here there is a catch which opens up the magazine, and you can see the rounds all sit in here like this. I'm going to dump those out. It's not a rechangeable magazine, it's a fixed magazine, and you're going to see more about that in a second. And then I'm going to pop open the side cover. So I should hinge it a little bit first, there we go. Set that aside for now. There are some mechanisms on this which are actually important to function, but we'll get to those when we need to. And there is the inside of the firearm. So a few obvious things to go over is we have the bolt, the barrel, the magazine, the feed pawl right here, which brings the rounds from the magazine down to the bolt. We've got a bolt catch. The fire control group is down here, and then the entire handle, when it's closed and opened, is what cocks the gun. As you can clearly see, it retracts the barrel, and there's a special method of cocking the gun when you do that. So that's kind of a really basic overview. So let's start with the heart of the firearm, which is the bolt and barrel, and then go from there. So I'm going to remove those. It just comes right out. And then the bolt lifts off the barrel, and there we have the heart of the gun. So let's start with the bolt. Now, this is super funky looking, I know, because it goes way forward. That's just for spring reasons and for cam reasons. There are some parts on here which interact with sears on the rest of the gun for the feeding cycle. But this little hook hooks in this little piece of brass right here, which allows the bolt to be spring biased compared to the barrel. So it can be moved in relation to the barrel and pulled back into chamber. This big piece of brass here is the barrel's spring bias, which lets the entire barrel and bolt assembly reciprocate to the rear and be pulled back forward. So that's why you have 2 springs on here. The bolt itself, the part which you probably think of as a bolt, is right here. And this is a little bolt head, and it's got a few important features. First of all, we have an extractor right there. We have the firing pin right here, which is biased forward. That is part of the in-chamber indicator system. Totally wild to use the firing pin as a sensor, but that's what's happening here. And then this little pocket is the sear, which engages with the bolt hold open, which is important for a long stroke recoil system to operate. And that forms the important components there. And then on the bottom here, we have this little lug, which is actually how the system locks up. It's a tilting bolt system, and that's part of the locking. This is a locking 22 long rifle. Insane, I know. And then right here we have a little fin, which is part of the mechanical system that feeds in the next round. It kind of holds the feeding tray in place until the round is fully fed in. And then right here we have a fin, which is actually a cam follower, which is what unlocks the bolt. It lifts the bolt back up and unlocks it. Now, let me show you how this locking mechanism works, along with how the chamber indicator works. So, in operation without a round in the chamber, the little tiny block here, which is attached to the firing pin, prevents the bolt from moving down, and it prevents that little tab from tucking into that pocket. So the gun cannot lock. It just sits there like that, which is fine because there's no rounds in the chamber. It can't shoot. And there's this little red indicator right there, which is lifted up by that amount, and that is visible on the outside or not visible depending on what's going on, so that when it's lifted up you can't really see it, which means that the gun is not chambered. Now when a round is in the chamber, that little firing pin is pushed back, and I'm going to simulate that by pushing this little block over, which allows the gun to lock. Let me do that real quick. So that gets pushed over, and I see I have to get my fingers on here just right. There we go. The gun just locks. So now you can see that this little tab on the bolt has tucked into that little pocket on the barrel, and you are now completely locked. We cannot open that up. And then to unlock it, this little fin gets pushed up when the entire thing is cycling to the rear by a cam surface, and Boom, you hear that little click? We just unlocked, and now we cannot lock again. That keeps us unlocked. Here we have the receiver with most of the components on it. Now, I'm actually going to grab a live round here, which will be triggering to some folks. And the magazine feeds that round along with all these little pawls, which is super awesome. In fact, this is a good time to show you kind of how that works. It's basically just like a belt fed. When the barrel reciprocates, these two little surfaces here and here interact with this little catch down in here, right there. It's not even a catch, it's just a little boss, which slides back and forth, reciprocating these little white teeth, which allows the rounds to be slowly fed across. There are corresponding black teeth on the top of the magazine, and you can imagine if you know how a belt fed works. One claw pulls the round over, and it's basically like a reciprocating ratchet, back and forth, and it works the rounds from clip to clip all along here until they get to the feed paw. Oh, I just had them upside down. It works them rim up, so along here like that until it gets to the feed paw. Totally interesting note, if the gun is not being fired, the round sitting in the feed paw lives there all the time, which means that you cannot feed new rounds into it. It's actually a terrible dilemma. It'll cause a jam. You can't just keep reciprocating this and try to keep pushing rounds if you don't pull rounds out. Well, he gets around it in just a stupid, simple way. So clever, it's so simple, is that there's a spring, and you might be able to just see it underneath there, moving back and forth. That spring adds a buffer between this little boss and those guys there. So if I hold them in place and I'm able to wiggle this back and forth without that moving, because that spring is adding a buffer, so it's kind of a force to overcome type situation. If it doesn't need to feed, it won't feed. But if it needs it, that spring is plenty stiff to feed the rounds over. Let's move on to the next segment, which is how this cartridge gets moved down to there so that it can be stripped off into the chamber. And the way this works is just mind-boggling. It's just, I just love it so much. Now, I'm gonna call this system a flip-flop. You could call it a toggle of sorts, but the way it works is the barrel has a number of features on it, the barrel bolt assembly. On the front here, it has this big boss. This is the boss that charges the flip-flop, as you will see. The bolt has this little catch right here. That is what hits the return sear to return the cartridge feed tray up. There's a little catch right here. You can just see that is what causes the tray to pop down. And the way this works is the entire system reciprocates to the rear, and then that charges the flip-flop system. The barrel goes forward like that, which causes the little flip-flop to flip, which brings the round down, and then the bolt strips it off, and then this little catch here hits the return system, which flips the flip-flop back up. It's insane. It's like totally positive in all directions. It seems mechanically impossible. You have like down and back with positive spring return. It's insane. Let me show you how it works. So there's a few components here. This right here, this little block, this is the sled, and there's a pin that it rides on, and that pin is what pushes this guy here and moves him. Right here is the sear that, when it's pushed, releases this block to return this into its ready position. And right here, there's a sear which releases the spring in this direction to move this down into the loading position. Now, we're going to begin this cycle artificially by pushing this back. Click, just like that. Now, this sear popped up and is armed, but another sear is now armed too. And that sear is this one right here. So this is just incredible. When this, well, let's look at the current spring bias. This sled right now is pushing the spring against this block. That block is attached to this shaft, and that shaft runs all the way across. This block is part of it, all the way across, and through here, it pushes against this underneath, like that, and that's what can rotate it. So when I release this block via this sear, what's going to happen is that spring is going to push that pin this way. And you're going to see that right here. Book. Now, the round went flying in this case, but now our tray is in the down position. So now the bolt, and by the way, what caused that to trip is when our bolt is locked to the rear via this little guy right here. What caused that to trip was the barrel moving all the way forward into its fully forward position. it hit that, causing that to trip. So it brought that tray down. We now have a round sitting here ready to be stripped. Now, simultaneous to that action, something else happened. And we'll go over this again. There's a pin right there, and you can see that pin gets pushed down by this tray. And what that does is it lifts that catch up, which releases the bolt. So when this moves down, boop, the bolt is released and is allowed to go forward. Now let me put this back into its previous ready orientation. There we go. So our bolt was just dropped by that, and it starts slamming forward, and it strips the round out of the tray, pushes it into the chamber, and just as the gun begins to go into battery, that little sear catch I showed you on the bolt, no, not sear, I keep using bad terminology, sorry guys, but the this little guy here, that little catch or trip point is really what it is. I'm terrible at terminology, my apologies. It hits this guy right here, which returns that to its forward position. Now you're probably wondering, how do you have a spring which works both ways? Well, let me try to show you. Let's put it down. There are actually two springs in action here. There is a very weak return spring on this sled, which is not very strong, but it's enough to flip it back up weakly. It's currently being overcome by the much more powerful spring, linear spring down here. So what happens when we push this lever is it allows this sled to move back in this direction. Now, there's only enough compression left in this spring to move it about maybe 50 thousandths of an inch. So this spring was mostly discharged, bringing the sled down, but not completely. So if I were to hold the sled with a screwdriver and hit the catch at the same time, you will see it only jumped a little bit. Now, that little bit is enough to kind of jostle the feed tray loose, and the feed tray's internal spring is what allows this to return. So if you see, well, if I hold this catch down here with my finger, and then I show you this, you can see that big spring is not really compressing. All that's happening is we're just moving the feed tray back and forth. It's critical to understand that that little bit of compression left in this spring here is what gives it such a positive jump like that. It gets it started so that this weak spring can finish the job. So that is the toggle mechanism and how it brings the next round down. And it's just incredible. Let's talk about a couple little details. So there is this mechanism on this cover here. Now this top cover is the one that I previously took off and removed and set aside. There is this little spring bias right here. And it serves an important purpose, and that is basically locking the gun. When the bolt comes forward and there is a round in the chamber, nothing prevents the gun from just going into battery. However, there is nothing making the gun go into battery. There is no cam system forcing this down, so the gun might not lock, which would obviously be very bad. What ensures that the gun locks is this little spring mechanism. This goes in like this, about. And it's sitting above the bolt, and it has a little rounded surface on it which pushes down on the bolt all the time. And when it has the opportunity to lock, that downwards bias causes it to lock. So that is what actually causes it to lock. And once the gun is locked, it stays locked until that cam right here, this cam follower, forces up against this spring bias right here, unlocking it. All right, let me show you how this gun is chambered. The standard procedure for chambering is to close the handle to this position, take this little lever, push it into that little slot right there, and then complete closing the gun, release the lever, and then open it back up. And when you open it back up, you can hear it pull back and flunk, chamber the next round in. It's super cool actually to watch. Obviously, we're going to remove the round from the chamber first. Okay, so during ordinary operation, when the gun is folded, it does not move far enough back for the little catch here, the little sear, to lock the bolt to the rear. So you can see when the gun is folded, nothing actually changes inside the gun. All we're doing is we're just making the gun more compact and retracting the barrel, but we're not unlocking it or anything like that. It stays locked. Actually, that's actually not quite true. When you move it all the way to the rear, it does actually unlock it, but it doesn't lock the bolt to the rear. So when we're in the rear, we actually are unlocked. So if the gun were to fire in the rear, it's not locked, and the bolt would fly apart and probably cause damage or something. Interesting little detail that I just realized. So the barrel is coming back, and when we fully fold the handle, the gun gets more compact. But if you can see there, it does not move far enough to the rear. There's still a space here where the bolt is not locked to the rear, so that when you unfold the gun, it returns to the ready position, ready to fire. Now, when we push that little lever, something different happens. When we push this little lever, it allows the gun to go all the way back. So when we unfold it, now we're locked to the rear. This is the same situation you're in after you actually fire a round, because the recoil bottoms the bolt out fully, locking it to the rear. So this kind of is simulating that. So this allows the entire cycle, bonk, you just saw that super coolness going on there, to strip a round off and put it into the chambers. Now there's some other neat little details. One of them is right in here, there is this little leaf spring here. And I just love this, because rather than having a little spring catch with a sear up here for the locking mechanism, what holds the gun open is not something that finicky. It's actually this long bit of steel, which is spring loaded, and it snaps, click, and holds the gun open. So when you push this green lever down, it's actually a wedging action, and it just wedges that guy down for you to open it back up. It's a lot of fun right there. Okay, so there is a component in this gun I haven't really talked about, and that's the fire control group, and that's because I don't actually know how it works. It's buried in there. It has a large, powerful spring down underneath here. There is a disconnector mechanism which appears to rely on a rotating bar grabbing a little sear. There is the trigger itself. That tail is part of the hammer action rod. And there is a fun part here I can show you though, and that's this little plunger. So if I just pull this trigger right now, that's all that happens. The hammer just pops up to that position. Nothing bad happens, I don't break anything, and if I did have a live round in here for some dumb reason, like I forgot to take it out earlier, the gun wouldn't fire. The reason is he has this little safety plunger. It's like on an electronic device or a printer where it won't run when it's open. Well, this little plunger here is a safety so that when the cover is removed, you can't drop the hammer and destroy the gun, because it's a very stiff spring, and I'm sure there's something in here you'll probably break. So if I hold that little plunger down and then pull the trigger, it's a bit difficult to do, of course. We're able to pull, now I caught it with my finger, but the hammer's able to fall to here. And there's actually, it seems like several different half cock positions. If I pull the trigger again, we're able to get it to fall further. Like there's a cock right there, and then boom, it's able to fall further. I do not know what that is for or why it exists. Some sort of safety mechanism, I'm sure, but that's interesting. There's just several sear surfaces on that hammer that it can catch on. All right, so there's one more thing I want to touch on here, and that is a component I do not understand. I haven't figured it out yet, and that is on the handle here. When we, oh, by the way, there's a blue catch right here. You can see this is just the release. So when the gun is folded, this locks interacting with parts on the other side, so you can press that and open the gun up. That's all that does. But there is a component here on the handle. On the outside, it looks like this. It's a little switch. And the only thing that does, and you can see it interacts on the inside, when the gun is folded, this handle is up in this position. And that switch, if I install this barrel, I'll show you where it pushes. It pushes against that piece of brass right there. It just pushes against it. It spring biases that up. And I cannot figure out what that does. This brass does not appear to move in any way. I have no idea. I'm completely dumbfounded as to why that switch exists and what it does. I have not figured that out. Maybe there's something in the instruction manual, which I should probably read in more detail. But it just pushes up against that, and I have no idea what it does. There is another fun thing here. I know there's just so many fun things on this gun. And that is this little red guy right here. You've probably noticed this guy flapping around. And on this side over here, there's another flap like that. Well, when the gun is assembled and you open it up, those flaps go in there, and that is what prevents hot brass from hitting your fingers as you hold it, because that front is open and the brass falls out the bottom there. So that is just completely funny. That's just a really great detail that I just love. These little complex little spring-loaded latches are just to keep your fingers from getting burned. And this is another good point to talk about one thing we haven't talked about yet, and that is how this gun ejects. We haven't even talked about the ejection yet. Well, there is a hollow passage. You can see part of it right here, and you can see the other part of it right in here, so that when you have an empty shell sitting here it's sitting in that bolt. The bolt, you know, the barrel, the bolt and barrel are sitting here. The barrel has returned forward. The shell is sitting in this zone right here. What happens is that when this little feed tray moves down, the underside of it, the part that's all brass colored right there, hits into that shell and flings it, shoves it out this opening into the handle where it then falls out. It's incredible. So the feed tray is also the ejector. It knocks it out like a little hammer, flips down and just takes that shell and blasts it out the bottom, which is, everything here is super positive. Like, it maintains control of the rounds really well, and doesn't allow anything up to chance, really. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you again next time.